Hi and welcome to Valley View Retreat, our wonderful home here in the Sierra de las Nieves mountains in southern Spain. So as I said last week, this video is going to be about our experiences with our Workaway volunteers and some tips or advice I would give you if you decide to do the same thing. So the first thing is that Workaway is a website, it's a platform where people who have work and accommodation or are willing to feed workers link up with people who are traveling around, maybe in your area, and looking for somewhere to stay and are willing to trade some work for accommodation and food. As a host, it doesn't cost you anything. If you're actually a Workaway volunteer, which is what they call the people who come to your place to do the work, they do actually pay a yearly subscription in order to be part of the system. So as a host, what you would do is you would identify the work that you actually need doing. You would go onto the website, you'd develop for yourself a profile which says who you are, where you are, a little bit about yourself and your situations. And then you would go on to describe the work that you actually have and the skills that you need the volunteers to actually have. And then you would go on to describe the accommodation and the food and any special things that people need to know about the area that you live in, or about the accommodation, and also things of interest in the area that they might like to do while they're here. Workaway volunteers typically will work 4 to 5 hours a day, 5 days a week, and the rest of the time is their own, and they can do whatever they want. So our experience was, I did our profile, I think in December of this year, and within a very short period of time, I had 5 or 6 people volunteering from very early on. They're coming in January, or wanting to come in January. So my first tip was that I needed to read their profiles very, very carefully to ensure that what it was I was looking for they could actually offer, and that I wasn't going to end up giving free accommodation and food to people who really weren't capable of doing the work, who didn't have the skills that were necessary, or whose expectations were beyond our capacity to provide for them. So their profiles tend to be very specific as well, and they also have grading. So if they've been to other hosts, the other hosts have left notes about what their experiences were. So the first thing I would suggest is that anybody who volunteers to come with you, that you read their profiles very, very carefully and read the feedback of other hosts very carefully, and anything you're unsure of, ask questions so that you're very clear. And the other thing I would suggest is that your own profile, you need to think about very, very carefully before you put it out there for everyone to see. We were very lucky with the volunteers that we got, and although there were some minor issues, they were very accommodating with those, and vice versa. We were very accommodating with any issues that we found with them as well. But there were issues, and most of it had to do with the profile, and with both our profile and their profile, and not really being clear enough. So there are 2 issues there. The first thing is that you need to identify very clearly what your needs are before you actually commit those to paper, and what the skills are that you will actually need. And you also need to identify what specific things about your location, about your accommodation, and about your needs that people may misinterpret and be shocked by when they actually arrive, and repeat those things over, and so that there are no surprises when people come. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is that you need to look at your profile and anything that you write down in terms of your expectations from the point of view of somebody whose first language is not yours. So for instance, our first volunteers were German, and some of the expressions that we would use as native English speakers, they either didn't understand or they misinterpreted. So the first thing was that we live off-grid, they had no idea what off-grid means, because it's not something that translates readily from German to English. Luckily enough, they had an English friend who was able to explain it to them. But they did tell us that in the profile, we just said we live off-grid, and didn't go on to explain that. And that could have created a major problem when people arrive and discover that we don't have town water, and that there isn't an inexhaustible supply of electricity, or that we use dry toilets. Despite the fact that we did actually make it clear later on, it wasn't as succinct as it needed to be. So in terms of the actual chores that you have, the work that you need to be done, you need to make it very clear what those are and what the skills are that you're looking for. Also, if you are providing food for these individuals, you need to be very clear about what their dietary restrictions are, and what their expectations are in terms of the food. The couple that we had come to stay with us looked after their own breakfast, and we provided lunch and we provided dinner. Now, we made it very clear in our profile that we are not vegetarian and we are not vegan. What we didn't make very clear in the profile was that we expected that the duties, the cooking duties, would be shared. So because we didn't make that very clear, we ended up cooking all of the meals, the lunches and the dinners. And that can create an issue, because it means that you have to leave, half an hour early, whatever the work is that you're doing, in order to go and make the lunch. And then because there are more people for dinner, it may be that takes longer time to prepare. They did help with the washing up, but we didn't make it clear that that was an expectation, and we should have. So be very, very clear about what it is that you want. And if you want to share cooking duties, make sure that that's in your profile. And if you want to share washing up duties, make sure that that's in. And if you're a vegetarian or vegan, make sure that that's in. Or if you have a problem with meat eaters, or if you have a problem with catering for people who are vegan, because it's difficult to provide for them wherever you live, or in terms of shopping. Go through their profile once they've offered to be a volunteer. Go through their profile and make sure there isn't something in there that you would find difficult to actually cope with. And be prepared for differences. We're not particularly religious people, but the couple that came to us, they do things like grace before meals. And if that was something that you had you were going to have a problem with, you need to have made that very clear beforehand and not create friction while they're actually here. Other people may have a problem with, I don't know, some political view that you may actually hold. If you're not an accommodating person, if you're not a tolerant person, then you may actually find that having volunteers come and stay with you is not something that is for you. You're better off paying somebody to come and do the job, and you don't have to actually interact with them all that much. Again, we were very lucky with the people that came to stay with us. They were both fairly accomplished musicians, very accomplished musicians and singers, and I'm a professional guitar player, and my wife sings a bit, so we had wonderful evenings. And it made it a very convivial time when they were actually here. But some of that had to do with the fact that these were people who were within 10 years of us in terms of age. It may be that having people come to stay with you where there are vast age differences may actually create issues that you wouldn't have thought of before. They may want to go to the bar every night. They may want to have parties and stay up late. These are things that you would need to identify what you can tolerate, what you can't, and to put that into your profile. We made it very clear that we don't accept smokers here. We're in a security area, and for 9 to 10 months of the year, the fire risk here is very, very high. So we don't accept smokers, and we don't accept people who are drug users, or people who have problems or issues with alcohol. We're not in a position to cope with that. And if there was any sort of medical emergency, getting first responders here would take hours. So you've got to make stuff like that very, very, very clear. And you know, the nearest hospital to us is like an hour and a half away. People who are coming here would need to know these things, and they also need to know that they would have to provide their own medical insurance. We can't cope with paying for somebody's medical emergency. So make it very clear about what your expectations are and what your limits are in terms of what you can accept and expect. The other thing, okay, start as you mean to continue. We're well, I'm going to say we're very social people. We're not very social people, but we're very gregarious. No, we're not very gregarious people either. How am I going to put this? When people come to visit, we make them feel at home, as if they are at home. So we tend to go a little bit overboard. And when our volunteers arrived, we made very lavish meal, and we had wine with it, and we had beer. We asked them what beer they drank and whatever. And then, of course, we got a bit embarrassed when the next meal came. And rather than go back to our normal diet, we kept going with that. So that we had wine with meals in the evenings and beer, and the meals themselves became a little bit more elaborate than we would normally have. And it ended up that, I mean, apart from the fact that means a lot more preparation and a lot more cleaning up afterwards, the costs were significantly more than they would have been if it was just, you know, 2 extra people that came. So start as you mean to continue, and make it very clear what your meals are going to be. Issue 2 in relation to the meals were timings. You know, different people from different cultures eat at different times, and we found that the German guests, they ate their lunch, or normally they would want their lunch an hour or an hour and a half later than we would normally have it, and dinner the same, an hour and a half later than we would normally have it. Now, we accommodated them, but if you're not going to do that, make it very clear what your meal times are in your profile, and reiterate that when they actually arrive. So that was the first thing about the meals, that they ended up being at different times. And the second thing about the meals was that we didn't make it very clear that our expectation was that when you said that you were going to be there at 7 o'clock, that you were going to be there at 7 o'clock. So when you've spent, you know, an hour or an hour and a half making a meal, and it's a hot meal, and people, instead of turning up at 7 o'clock, turn up at 25 past 7, that can be upsetting. I certainly found it upsetting. But I hadn't made it clear that our meal times were set. You know, it's 7 o'clock, someone is preparing that meal. Maybe they're not used to having hot meals or at that particular time, and they don't realise that, you know, if it goes another 20 minutes, that it ends up dried up and it's not the meal that really we wanted to eat. So it's much easier to make it very clear in the beginning, these are our meal times, we expect you to be there early, 5 minutes early or whatever, to wash up and settle down. The meal will be on the table for this particular time. We expect you to be there. And that means that you cut out a lot of the issues that could possibly develop if people don't, you know, people are late or whatever. Other things, washing. I don't mean hand washing, but laundry. Be aware of the fact that these people have to have their own, you know, clothes, and they'll need access to a washing machine and or drying facilities or whatever, and make it clear to them that, okay, this is the day that we've allocated for you to do your washing. If you bring it to us, we'll put it in the washing machine and we'll give it back to you to dry, or we'll dry it and whatever. But that is an issue that we don't normally think about. And the other thing is timing. Our guests really didn't want to start work until 9:30 in the morning, and then work until lunchtime and leave themselves free in the afternoon. And on a normal winter's day here, that would probably be okay. However, while they were here, we had some summer weather, which meant that by 11 o'clock in the day, it was 28 degrees. And at 28 degrees, working outside becomes difficult, very difficult. It's very, very hot. You may not be, whatever the job is that you're doing, may not be in the shade or possible to create shade. and it becomes very onerous. So what I should have done was made it clear to the people that we start work at 8:30 in the morning and that we finish at lunchtime, and we expect that, make your expectations clear. Remember that you're the one that understands the environment that you're working in and the chores and the needs of those. So make it very clear very early on that this is what's going to happen. If you leave it up to them, you may end up in a situation where work doesn't get done as a result of starting late or starting early. Now, the next thing is that the chores that you've actually decided to do, the tasks that you want to accomplish while people are here, you may not actually be able to. You may not be able to because of, like us, we ended up in a lockdown 2 days before they arrived, a local lockdown, which meant that I couldn't access supplies. It was unexpected that we were going to end up in a local lockdown, but it meant that for the time they were here, I had to work with the materials that we had here. And it meant that some of the work that I wanted to get done, I couldn't get done. And I didn't really plan for that, so I didn't have alternative jobs. And really, when you're making out your list of chores, you need to make out one that's ideal. So if you're actually able to access all of the materials that you need, all of the tools work properly and don't break down, the weather doesn't get in your way, and no one gets sick or whatever, that's the ideal. And then another one, well, if I can't access all of the materials that I need, we can move on to this job. If the weather doesn't do what it's supposed to do and it's rainy, we can be doing this, whatever. So you need those at least 2 lists, and possibly 3, because the weather may not be anything like you expected, and everything will be indoors, and you'll need to work out what needs to be done with that as well. So don't make one list and expect that everything is going to run perfectly and you're going to get that done. You need to have alternatives. Otherwise, you have people staying with you, you're feeding them, you're providing them with accommodation and electricity and water and everything else, and you're not necessarily getting any benefit for that. So be very careful about making multiple lists so that if something goes wrong, you can move on to something else and at least make use of the time that they're actually available. When you've decided to do a job on the day that you're doing that job, before you start, stop. Look your volunteers in the eye and say, this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. This is what I'm going to do. This is what you're going to do. Do you understand? Now, I know that sounds like you're speaking to simpletons, but it avoids the possibility of significant accidents and mistakes. Make sure that everybody understands exactly what it is you're trying to achieve, how you're going to achieve that, and who is responsible for which part of it. Particularly if you're dealing with people whose first language is not your language. It makes so much sense. I know it sounds very odd, but it needs to be done. Otherwise, you can end up where really you don't achieve what it is that you wanted to achieve, or in your worst case scenario, you can end up with somebody hurt, which you definitely want to avoid. Have an emergency plan. So if something does go wrong, and if somebody gets sick or if somebody gets injured or whatever, you know exactly what it is that you should be doing, who it is you need to be calling, how you need to evacuate whoever it is, have your first aid kits and whatever on hand. Make sure that if there are any medical conditions that these people have, that you understand those medical conditions and what you need to do if something goes wrong. And make sure that they understand that these are the numbers, the emergency numbers, in case you're incapacitated and can't actually communicate. These are things that you need to be thinking about. And then a little bit lower down the list is this. If there is something in your environment which is really, really important, but fairly unique. For instance, we have a dry toilet. Our dry toilet means that when you do your business, you have to sit down. Whether you're a male or a female, you have to sit down. Otherwise, the system doesn't work. And the other thing is that when you're finished, particularly if you're pooing, that you take a handful of sawdust and you drop it into the bucket to cover your poo so that it dries out. You can say this to people when they arrive. They may remember it and they may not. And in fact, most of the time they'll remember some of it, but they won't remember all of it. So our system, because of the separating system, if you're a man and you stand up and you try and pee into the pee section, it'll just splash back all over you and all over the floor and all over everything else. If you start shoveling sawdust into the bucket will fill up in 2 or 3 days. And it means that somebody has to empty that bucket 2 or 3 times a week, whereas in reality, the bucket needs to be emptied once every 3 weeks. If you put too much sawdust in it, you actually interfere with the drying out process. So these are things that people may not understand if they haven't worked with it. Write them out, print them out, and put it over the toilet. That way, every time they go in, they can see exactly what it is that they're supposed to do or what they're not supposed to do. And it's not just about toilets, it's about whatever. So, for instance, we work off harvested water. So it's not like when you're at home. You can't turn the shower on and wander around until it gets hot and then get into it and lather up and step outside of the stream and then step back in again. All that water, it's a huge amount of work to store that. So we put a little note, right, when you're washing, put the shower nozzle into the bucket while the cold water runs. When it gets hot, then turn it off, put it on, turn the water on while you get wet, turn the water off, lather yourself up, turn it on to rinse yourself off, turn it off again. Use the minimum amount of water necessary to accomplish whatever the task is, because we're dependent on rain and we're dependent on shifting water from one place to another. It's vitally important that we don't waste it. And from an environmental point of view, it makes more sense anyway. So things like that. And the other issue that we have is that we run on solar here, so electricity. The German people who came with the van had 2 heaters in their van, both of them running at 600 watts. The first night that they were here, luckily enough, I checked the solar system, and after I gave them the line for their lights or whatever, and discovered that we were running at 1.2 kilowatts. They had their heater on and just left it running. Now, our total capacity is 4.8 kilowatts, but we really can't use any more than about 4 kilowatts. This means that in less than 4 hours, we would have trashed our batteries. So I had to go and say to them, listen, there's a limit to the amount of electricity that you can use. Try and keep it at 400 to 500 watts for 4 or 5 hours a day. Otherwise, we won't be able to meet our needs. Particularly at night. During the day, it's not so big a deal, but at night, you need to be very careful. We didn't make that clear earlier on, and it could have created a major problem for us later on. So these are things that, if they're going to be issues on an ongoing basis, write them out on a sheet, print them out so that you can give it to new arrivals, and in the places where it's necessary, put it up as if it was a hotel, little warning notices. It makes it understandable for everybody and saves so much hassle later on. So our experiences were wonderful. The people were fantastic. We achieved an awful lot. Not everything that I wanted because of the lockdown, but we did get an awful lot done. Would I recommend Workaway? If everybody was like the couple that came to us, absolutely, yes. Fantastic idea. And it worked out really well. And these are people that we would now consider to be friends. We're still communicating with them a week afterwards, finding out how to get on with their new hosts. They invited us to go and visit them in Germany. We told them that to come back at any stage. I'm keeping them up to date on the progress of the work that they started. It's been a wonderful experience, and it can be a wonderful experience for you as long as your expectations are realistic, and as long as you are very, very honest in your profiles about what it is that you need and about your specific situation, what it is you can tolerate and what it is that you can't tolerate. These are things that are really, really important. So, yeah, do it. Absolutely do it. It's fantastic. In terms of my health, while they were here, I probably worked harder than I would have if they weren't here. So I was in a lot of pain. But It did help with my recovery, and I'm achieving a lot more now than I was a couple of weeks ago. I still got a lot of pain in my back at night, but during the day I'm functional and working around. Not that anybody cares, but I just thought I'd give you an update anyway on mowing. So next week I'm going to have a look at the kitchen that I'm putting in, which so far has been made almost entirely of salvaged material from the old shed and some spare tongue and groove that I had left over. So far the fixings in it have cost more than anything else, so I'll give you a look at that. Okay, have a great time over this week, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.